Hey, hey, welcome back to Front Porch Radio on, yeah, the best in basement radio. I'm Julie Wilder, and holy smokes, it has been a truly wild few weeks around the globe. Um, and there are three international stories that caught my attention, um, and which were probably completely drowned out. By the media frenzy around the demise of Charlie Kirk, which dominated the headlines here in the United States. So just kind of briefly, I'm going to just kind of introduce some of them, and then I'm going to break down a few of the things that happened. The first was in Nepal. There was a leaderless and decentralized youth movement that is simply like called Gen Z, which filled the streets of Kathmandu to demand dignity and democracy, and standing up against corruption and censorship. And they literally toppled the government and voted an interim leader in on Discord. It was I saw like something come across my social media, and I was like, that can't be real. This is like somebody's like dramatizing this, but it's actually real, and I'm going to tell you about it. And then in Brazil, a court has said no to authoritarian rule, convicting former President Jair Bolsonaro for plotting a coup, even as the nation wrestles with division and doubt. And he's been on my radar for a little bit because him and Trump are buddies. And so I've kind of peeked in at what is happening in Brazil in the last couple of years. And so I was very intrigued to see that. And then in Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum stood on the balcony of the National Palace, the first woman ever to give the cry of independence, reclaiming a 215-year-old tradition for a new generation. Um, it was, I mean, it was the kind of like impactful moment that, of course, her being the first female president, which happened in October, would have, just brought so much joy to so many women, in particular in Mexico. But seeing this traditional ritual, and she said some very interesting new things and did a few new things that were really cool for the people that were watching. Um, and then, of course, here in the United States, we had the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Um, and a chilling reminder of what happens when political conflict hardens into violence. But there's a lot of themes about freedom of speech, and you know, being used as political pawns that are going on. There's all just kinds of things there. So I'm not going to focus too much on the Charlie Kirk thing because I feel like you've all heard about it. And these other stories that are going on are kind of a big deal. And it's just very interesting, especially the thing that happened in Nepal. So throughout it all, I want us to listen for the three kinds of voices: the helpers, those that are trying to mend what's broken; the healers, those working to restore trust and dignity; and the heretics, those brave enough to stand up against corruption, repression, and fear. Because in every uprising, every conviction, every ritual of renewal, and every tragedy, those voices show us what's possible. So yeah, so let's hang out. Front Porch Radio is Mondays from 4 to 5. It's a weekly program. A lot of times I have a guest on here to tell us what's up. Last couple of weeks I had Nina Strike from the Global Peace Film Festival, which just ran its course here in at least the live ones did, and I got to see the film Lily after the Lily Ledbetter. It was like the opening night thing, and I also got to see a story about a manta ray, which was super touching. And those two things are kind of in the backdrop of today's show, and I might even touch on those as well. But Global Peace Film Festival, there's a bunch of shorts happening. It's an all online festival for this week, so you can still enjoy some of the Global Peace Film Festival. Okay, so let's kind of dig in though to what happened in Gen Z, because it was arguably the most interesting thing that has happened in recent history, as far as I'm concerned. And all of these things happened right around. This started on the 8th, it went on to the 9th. The Brazilian guy, that was a couple of days later, and then the Mexican president doing the Independence Day ritual was a few days later. So this is all kind of in a pretty tight time frame. Um, and so uh, I have not been following what's going on in Kathmandu, Nepal. So I found a couple of Substacks. Um, I found on Substack. I love if you guys aren't a Substack. Anybody who's a deep thinker and wants to read an essay because we don't have time for a 2-minute video, but we have time for a 10-minute read. That's me. And it was just totally awesome to read what was going on and get caught up because this has not been on my radar. And so essentially like the context is that you know, there's been, with corruption, it's kind of like a thing these days. And so young people in Kathmandu, Nepal, they were having anti-corruption protest. And there was tons of students there. It was very Gen Z. Everyone was on social media. And the protests were triggered in part by a ban on various social media platforms. Basically, the state was trying to get each of the media platforms to register and in their country and gave them like a 7-day deadline or something like that to do this registration. And then they when the social media companies didn't register, they of course then shut down social media. And that was seen as a way to basically silence all of this protest that had been going on around basically nepotism within the political leadership. I mean, all kinds of stuff going on because it's the vibe in politics these days is that there's just all this corruption going on, right? And so that was kind of like the foundation for it, but it was a peaceful protest, singing and dancing, like young people do. And it wasn't necessarily, from what everyone can kind of feel, it wasn't necessarily a protest. The whole movement, the whole Gen Z movement, it's not like an organization where people are coordinating with like strong leaders. It's basically a decentralized. It's just a bunch of folks using Discord and other forums to try to kind of figure out what's going on. And so there was just all this stuff about government corruption, nepotism, mismanagement of public funds, restriction of free speech, and frustrations over economic and social inequality. Okay, so like, same story, different country, right? And so it was peaceful, everything was chill. And as protesters were attempting to enter a parliament building, the Nepal police and armed police force employed deadly means of retaliation. They put tear gas and water cannons and then rubber bullets and then finally live ammunition firing like blindly into the crowd. A boy in a school uniform was shot in the head, and the footage of him bleeding out like went viral. And by the end of that day, at least 19 protesters had been killed. And so this was basically when we're talking about like this was not like a planned like overthrowing of the government. They were just protesting what was going on. And then protesters were killed while doing this. Peaceful protesters were. So the next day, crowds began to gather across the country, and it was like a little bit restrained at first, but then anger, gave way to like crowds storming the houses of politicians and like burnt them down. The leader of every one of the three biggest political parties lost their homes. And there was a couple of leaders that managed to escape unscathed in military helicopters. Like literally the military had to come and like airlift these leaders out of their houses. But one leader was not so lucky. Protesters did corner him and were beating him up. And his I don't know if they beat his wife up or not. But anyway, the army finally rescued those people too. So the seat of all three branches of government were attacked and set on fire, like the federal parliament, the Supreme Court, like it was crazy. But the Gen Zers, who were the majority of these protesters, disavowed the violence and called for protesters to go home. They said infiltrators had orchestrated the attacks. It was not clear that, and it was clear that not all protesters were Gen Z. Many were older and clearly experienced with violence. Some came armed, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like some confusion there about like, what exactly, who was doing the violence and all that kind of stuff. But what was interesting to me was that in this 2-day period, more than 70 people were killed, including a few police officers, and then thousands of people were injured. Buildings, including Parliament, Supreme Court, Prime Minister's office, they were vandalized or set on fire. There was some looting that went on, clashes with security forces. But what was interesting is that in the aftermath of that, what you had was citizens on the street basically demanding that people who did looting would like, be found and have the, prosecuted for the looting. They were also en masse in the streets cleaning up all of the damage that had been done the day before. I mean, like everybody just came out to clean up the mess. Regular people just coming out to clean up their mess. And then like crazily, the prime minister, KP Sharma Ali, I think you have his name, is how you say his name. He resigned amid the unrest, and an interim government was formed. A former Chief Justice, her name is Sushila Kirky. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I apologize because I'm just a regular gal without a team to help me get the phonetics down. She was appointed interim prime minister via a Discord vote. Okay. And like everyone was on Discord because the other social media had been shut down, which was one of the reasons why they were out protesting. And so they were basically spontaneously organizing on Discord, and basically voting on like essentially like decentralized, leaderless, collaborative decision making, very similar to what you might have seen at Occupy Wall Street back in the day. Definitely tactics I have seen the farm workers here in Florida use in order to affect change. And this is like a literally ongoing like it's only 9:22, so this just happened a couple of weeks ago, and so they're still in the middle of figuring out what this means. But a lot of the person who's been put into place is basically an anti-corruption female, known for her stance against corruption in the area, and she put into place people that are known anti-corruption people. And so I was just like, well, that's fascinating information to see. And it was also fascinating to look at how a group of people like reacted to a direct assault on peaceful protests in a way that was also like I saw some reports that that just the way that the like the care and concern and then the nurturing and the cleanup and then the calls for the people who were actually looting, like the Gen Z was like, hey, we're not down with the looting, we're not down, like they were not down with any of the politicians or police officers that got injured. They like were like, no, that's not what we're standing for. And they were literally not just taking to the streets to protest, and then be involved in a transition of power that was just wild to watch. But then they went to the streets and they cleaned up the mess the very next day. And so it's like one of those, I know like right now, Charlie Kirk's I guess his organization is called Turning Point. And I feel like this is kind of like a theme, an inflection point, a turning point. The only thing I can kind of relate to in my historical view was when I think Reagan was like, take down that wall. And then, the then something was said, and then basically the Berlin Wall just started being dismantled. And it was just like one of those things where it was just time and the energy was there, and it wasn't a planned or organized thing. It was just a seize the moment kind of atmosphere. And so I just really encourage you guys to Google the Gen Z uprising in Kathmandu in Nepal, and just become aware of what is going on out there in the world, because the Gen Z is, the largest population of people, um, experiencing extreme, wealth inequality and all different other kinds of things. But they also like what was wild and weird to me was just the I mean, they were basically recording, just, is like, here's this crazy like protest going on and tear gas everywhere and things like that. But they are like doing like social media, like like they're recording memes and doing like aura cleansing, like all these things that I'm sure the Gen Zs are trending and know about. But like they were injecting that kind of humor and play into it, and then watching like people who were police being marched to the jail by Gen Z. It is wildly intriguing what happened. And I just really like urge everyone to look at it because I've never seen anything like it. And it is like unfolding in real time. And I mean, to see something like Discord being used to, okay, well, we can't get together for a national vote, but we don't have anyone to put into power because we're leaderless. And this wasn't a planned thing. So you know what we're going to do? We're just going to go to Discord and we're going to put a few people's names up there and everyone can vote on who they would like to see. I mean, that's 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 wild. That is self-determination. That is agency. That is autonomy. That is and it is also um very accountable. I mean, to go out into the streets and clean up, to call out the looters that were looting and demand that, they be prosecuted. All of those different things, there was like an ethical through line through it all. So anyway, that was just wild to me. And it should be kind of wild to everyone else. The social media ban has been lifted. But it was an interesting demonstration about how Gen Z was able to mobilize rapidly because of digital channels, and how free speech and social media remain powerful triggers for people, right? And these are big themes, here in the United States right now as well. It does raise questions about legitimacy, government corruption, the old elites versus the new generation, and how democracies deal with discontent. And also possible comparisons with protest movements in other parts of the world, right? Driven by these younger demographics. So anyway, do some Googling, because it is, when we think about like coups and overthrowing the government and piece of power and all these different things, I think most of us in America, I think we think about the French Revolution. We think about our own American Revolution, and to have this be a relatively nonviolent. I mean, burning buildings down is not necessarily violent against people unless people are in there, of course. That's just destruction. That's destruction of property, preferable, but certainly symbolic, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, like to watch leaders being airlifted out of their homes, and then resigning, because they're literally run out of the out of the institutions. It's just wild to me, and it'll be interesting to watch what happens and how everything develops over there. So just kind of keep your eye on that. Now another thing that's kind of caught my eye was the conviction of gosh, how do you say his name? Zaire. I'm really sorry that I have it up here. Yeah, Zaire. I was right. Bolsonaro. He caught my eye kind of around the run up to this most recent presidential election here in the United States. I had a longtime friend, like really an acquaintance, that was a friend in another city, and she was, um, she was an independent minded person, and had friends of all political persuasions, and but then she started to get like a little bit weird, and I was like, "Oh man, is she getting caught up?" Like the way she was talking wasn't very logical, and like the way she described what was going on, it seemed like she was being like honestly groomed by not great people. Um and she started to talk about, "Oh, have you seen this guy in this president in Brazil? He's so great, da 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 da." And like I was like, what is she even talking about? And so I ended up researching this guy. And I was like, oh, this guy is no good. And he okay, let me get to my notes on this. So basically on September 11th, so this was just so September 8th and 9th was this uprising in Nepal. September 11th, the Brazilian Supreme Court convicted the former president of plotting a coup to remain in power after his 2022 election lost. He had styled himself as the Trump of the tropics, forging close ties with our president, echoing his rhetoric and disputing electoral legitimacy in several similar ways. I believe he was also plotting an assassination on his vice president and other people. And I mean, same story, different country. But one of the things that really stood out to me and why I have been very pointed at looking at our food system here and what this administration is doing with our food system is that part of what he was doing was to destabilize the food system. He was also dismantling environmental protections in the Amazon to weaken food security by empowering agribusiness at the expense of small farmers and indigenous communities. He's just like he also one of the things he did. I'm trying to see if I can find the article. No. Um, he also like he basically cut off funding for all of the, like, soup kitchens and shut them down for, like, food service violations, but, like, all of them, you know? And so he was creating all of this, agricultural distress, which is if you look at the tariffs and the soy, farmers in China, like, there's a lot going on there that is destabilizing our agricultural system, and it's gonna put extreme financial stress on our farm workers as well as our farm owners, I should say, and operators. And then also the attack on immigration is a huge attack on um, our farm workers that come for seasonal picking of the crops and planting of the crops. And so, anyway, that was something that always stood out to me and why I've been so focused on it, not just because I've covered farm worker issues on this program for, I don't know, many years. So he was destabilizing the food system, and yeah, so the charges included attempting to violently overthrow democracy, organizing a criminal organization, attempting to suspend election results, the alleged plans to assassinate the vice president, who's now the president, a Supreme Court justice, and others, right? So the conviction has polarized Brazilians who are divided. Some view it as justice as a necessary defense of democracy. Others think it's a witch hunt, because that's I'm sure what he's saying. There's been protests for and against this decision taking place. There's a concern over proposed legislative amnesty or constitutional changes that might shield them, basically giving them amnesty and like saying, "Oh, it's cool, like whatever, you just try to throw over the government, but we'll give you a pass." So that's kind of what's going on. There, internationally, there are also diplomatic ripples. The U.S. has revoked visas of certain Brazilian judicial officials connected to the case. And so this is a guy that, Trump has admired. He's actively defended on his Truth Out Social and, said he's a victim, and all of these different things. But I just thought it was, in an era where we are starting to see concrete evidence that the the government is not functioning as our forefathers ex- expected it to, with these checks and balances, and a lot of the unconstitutional activity of our current president has gone unchecked by the Senate and the Supreme Court. Of course, he does continue to lose lawsuits in a lot of ways all throughout the country. And of course, there's this huge Epstein thing hanging over his head, and a bunch of other people who are scared to death of that information coming out. So I just thought, hey, let's just take a look, because a lot of people are rightly concerned and frightened and scared of what this might mean for America, for our democracy, what is going on here. And I like to say, like, let's not let's not assume that we are going to end up in the Gilead because there are instances of people very similar to Trump that have taken power and being brought to justice. And sometimes it takes longer than we would like. But it does happen, and I don't want people to feel like there's not um, options, possible futures. Um, so this was, of course, a landmark for accountability. Very refreshing to see a former head of state convicted for staging a coup. And it'll be interesting to see what this signals for Latin America and in emerging democracies. And yeah, just interesting. Continue to watch what's going on in Brazil. And also for those of you that are um, a lot of what is going on around the country is this rise of strong men. It's a coordinated effort, and they're using similar playbooks. And so one of the pieces that was really, really critical for me in understanding what was going on was in Brazil was also very similar attacks to the food system that we are starting. We are definitely not just starting, but we're like in the full on throes of. Okay, and then in other like more exciting, brighter news. The first female president was leading a Independence Day like ritual that they do. Her name is Claudia Scheinbaum. She assumed the office in October of 2024, and Mexico's Independence Day is like September 15th and 16th. So she became the first woman to preside over the traditional Cry of Independence ceremony from the balcony of the National Palace in Mexico City. And so she made several symbolic gestures in that for the first time. A painting of a woman, Leono Vicaro, a key figure in Mexico's independent efforts, was among the portraits in the Palace Galaxy. She also received the national flag from an all-female honor guard. And notably, she was the first person to mention Indigenous people in her speech. And her themes, of course, included, discussions of sovereignty and resisting foreign intervention and things like that. And so, yeah, here she is. I was like, man, even Mexico has a female president before America. And it's like, that's how you know that you're in a patriarchy, is when you've never had a female president. Like, that's just it. Like, do you have a female president? Have you ever had a female president? You are in a patriarchy. That's it. That's what's going on. And so she's, of course, breaking male dominated tradition. And a lot of the things one of the things that really moved me was just watching some of these reactions on social media of women just like watching it and crying. And it's so moving to see somebody breaking a barrier like that, and somebody that you can relate to doing the thing that has been done by men for 200 plus years. Kind of a big deal. And really love that. You might remember her. She did all kinds of stuff. She was so cool, like when Trump was like being weird about Mexico. I can't remember exactly what she did now, but she was hilarious. I really liked her. Um, so yeah, it's like some cool stuff that's going on out there, right? Um, yeah, so those three things were big newsmakers last week that probably no one saw because of the media spectacle and distractions here in the United States, which on the one hand have a lot of people tuned out of social media, out of the news altogether. And if they don't, they tune in and they hear stuff like that, and they're just like, "Oh my goodness, I just cannot." Um, and so yeah, I mean, it's just been, I don't know. I like to look for, like I said earlier, like when I was talking to Nina Strike from the Global Peace Film Festival last couple weeks. I was thinking about how Mr. Rogers said, "Look for the helpers when you see trouble going on, and you want to basically look for hope and examples of the right thing to do." And I just thought, well, you know what? Let's look for the helpers, the heretics, and the healers. Um, because each have a very special role to play in times. And so, I can see the president of Mexico being a healer, and just healing a gender wound that has been going on for centuries. And the heretics in Nepal, and the helpers who were able to use the democratic process to convict a president in Brazil that was forming a coup and doing all kinds of unsavory activity. And so, yeah, so that was that. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Front Porch Radio. I'm Julie Wilder, and we have conversations for the common good every Monday from 4 to 5 p.m. here on WPRK. And one of the things that really kind of um, helps me focus my energy, I am able to keep up with the news and what's going on um, by first of all, kind of regulating it. Second of all, not being so reactionary. And third of all, by checking my revulsion instinct um, to look away from, I mean, so many people just can't even stand, to see images or the voice of our certain political leaders. It's just so unsavory. And I feel like that's part of the theater of what is going on. It's like characters in a live reality TV show. And it's just, like, ugh, I can't even, it's like, it's the difference between, what is it, the WWF, what is the World Wrestling Federation? It's like the people who love that kind of pop in circumstance and theater, and other people who are like, what is even going on? This is just ridiculous, right? Um, and so we just, continue to kind of do our own thing, which is key and important. But it's also important to understand what is going on out there in the world, because it is going to affect all of us, even if it hasn't directly affected all of us immediately. So just taking a deep breath about that. And one of the things that really kind of helped me this week was going to the Global Peace Film Festival. I watched Lily, and I wrote a piece on it on kind of like my response to watching that, because one of the things, maybe I should just pull that up. You guys should follow me on Substack. I have a Substack under Julie Wilder and Front Porch Radio. And I'm going to pull it up so I can just kind of get the highlights of what I was saying. Dashboard. Okay. I want to view the post. Okay. So, so one of the things that one of the movies was Lily, and it was about the the journey of Lily Ledbetter, who was the woman who was basically inspired the Equal Pay Act that President Obama, it was the first law he signed into law, the first piece of legislation that he signed into law in 2009 after he became president. Um, and I'm watching this story, and like that was 2009 when that happened. That was not, that was just like my kid was already born, right? I have a teenager, right? So that's that's pretty recent, in the grand scheme of like equal rights. And we all know that actually, even though it's a law, the enforcement of that and the unconscious bias and the all of the things that go into that, um, makes social change much longer than the legal changes, right? And so I was just reflecting on basically, I mean, she was in there was a lot to the story that I had no idea about. Like, I mean, I was busy in 2009, okay? I was running a business. Was Max born in 2009? Oh my god, she was. I was busy. I was having a baby. There was a lot going on, right? Of course I heard about it. And I was grateful that it happened and all of that. But I didn't really know the details, and that's why I love, having such a great program like the Global Peace Film Festival that we get to enjoy every year, is that we get exposed to some of these films that maybe we aren't, we're not going out of our way to find something, like, seriously heavy-hitting, about American history in our spare time, right? But it was a great experience, and, I state Rep, Anna Eskamani, saw her there. She's always shows up at cool things like that. Um, and I think that the Rollins College president, I heard her name was announced that was there, which was like really cool. I was like, oh, I need to get her on Front Porch Radio. If you're listening, um, new president of Rollins College, open invitation. Anyway, so it was a really cool experience to be in the room with so many cool people. I saw a lot of people that I've known for a couple decades in this community at that event, and I was just like, oh wow, okay, so she was for 19 years. I mean, extreme hostile workforce. It wasn't just the equal pay. It was misogyny, sexism, you know, um, retribution for filing complaints, like all different kinds of things that she dealt with. And finally she was like, that's it. I want to sue these guys. And she won, the first case. And she was awarded millions of dollars. But the, the company itself was like ready to pay out and wasn't going to appeal. But other people were like, no, this is bigger than you guys at Goodwill. We're going to help pay for the defense because this is billions of dollars for all kinds of businesses. If we let this one go through, then basically all these businesses are gonna, get sued for unequal pay, and this is a $1 billion problem for the manosphere, right? And so it ended up getting appealed to the Supreme Court, lost on appeal to the Supreme Court because the argument was that she would have had to have immediately within 180 days been like, this is unequal, even though everybody had to sign agreements saying that they wouldn't talk about their wages. So it was, basically there was no wage transparency. There was opposite of wage transparency. There was wage information suppression. So she would have gotten fired for knowing, two people would have gotten fired if they had known what the wage inequality was. So anyway, on this technicality of, even though the system was designed so that you couldn't, have wage equality, you also don't get it because it was 180 days. So that's what the act was, that basically every new paycheck is basically a new opportunity for people to talk about wage discrimination. So that was like, kind of the big deal. So after it lost at the Supreme Court level to a majority male conservative Supreme Court, obviously, then she was, with the help of, you know, women in Washington, they were like, well, we got to change the laws because this cannot stand. And so she was, going around the Hill doing her thing and had stumped up enough votes to get it passed. But then sitting President George Bush W was like, no, we can't have that. I'm going to veto it. And so then that some of the people, because this is a bipartisan issue, there's women on both sides of the aisle. There's families that would love to have more money on both sides of the aisles. And so that basically effectively killed it from being able to go forward. And then that became a central campaign issue for both Hillary and Obama during their presidential bids. Of course, Obama ended up becoming the presidential candidate. And I'm pretty sure that that issue was probably one of the reasons why he was elected because, a lot of people on both sides of the aisle, like I said, that's like a no brainer. If you're going to do equal work, you should get equal pay. And especially now that there's so many more women in the workforce and so many more women that are the top earners in their family, this is a family issue that affects everyone. So, um, so yeah, so that's kind of the story of it. But what I didn't know, but probably should have, is that, I mean, she was run off the road. She had her bird feeders poisoned at her property. There was somebody broke into her hotel room and tossed it upside down to try to intimidate her. Even at her place of work, somebody quote unquote accidentally ran into her with a piece of equipment that caused her to be injured. So there was just all of this crazy intimidation and ways that they tried to essentially deter her from pursuing the case and then pursuing the legal the change of the law, which you know it's just deep breath here. It just brought into sharp focus um, what older women and my friends that are people of color have, as they're watching what's going on in the current politics, they're like, this has always been the case. Like, this is nothing new. Like, it's always been like this, and, like, I get it, I mean, I understand, like, this country was founded on slavery and genocide and colonialism, and the Electoral College is rigged for landowners. I mean, we all know that, right? But I was reflecting on how, like my particular age group, I am a zillennial, which means, the end of Gen X, beginning of the millennials. And I graduated college in 2001, right? And what I was kind of reflecting on, especially for women in my generation and younger, is that like I graduated college in 2001 and I opened a restaurant in 2006 when I was like 26 years old. And so I feel like that was like a critical turning point, and there's like this kind of like cognitive dissonance between females in generations like my age and younger, and then those like above us that were raised through like the Civil War era and through all of these other eras where they were actively fighting for rights, civil rights, women's rights, all of those things. And like my generation, we didn't have to fight for women's legal rights, aside from maybe the Equal Pay Act, right? The older generations of women, of course, were continuing to defend or enforce or have like the enforcement of the rights they'd already won. But my generation was like, just like, we're like, okay, the the rights are in place. Now we got to go grab that. Now that those legal roadblocks are gone, the only ones that we were having to deal with really were like social biases and things like that, right? So the climbing the corporate ladder and trying to smash the socially upheld glass ceiling was like the task of the 80s and 90s. But in the new millennium, a lot of us said, whatever, that's not working for me, and just went and opened our own businesses. And so we built all these ecosystems with our bank accounts that certainly our grandmother's generation didn't have. Like 1974 was the first time you could have a bank account without a male cosigner. So I was just kind of thinking about like what do I have that set me apart from, say, my mother's generation? And I was, a lot of you can relate to this, especially people here at Rollins College right now. I was, of course, raised towards going to college and a career. That's not how my mom was raised. I had a scholarship to go into college so that I could actually go to college. I worked two good jobs during college to put myself through school. And I was promoted and mentored at those jobs. And those jobs had strong, diverse workforces, HR, and women who lifted me up through the ranks. Of course, I did have my own bank account the whole time. I've never had a joint bank account with anyone in my life. except for a business one. And well, I could tell you stories about that. I had access, of course, to birth control to prevent any unwanted pregnancies, and the choice to keep or terminate a pregnancy when I did become pregnant, which I did choose to. When I became pregnant, I did choose to keep my pregnancy going and ended up becoming a single mom because of it. I was also able to leave boyfriends who became toxic with the strength of domestic abuse laws, likely deterring a few of them from becoming physically abusive. I've also had wealthy women invest in me in various ways. And I've had court ordered and state collected child support. That was not something our mother's generations had. That is, because of the feminist movement, that we have that. I've had the opportunity. I've run 3 successful businesses. I run this talk show. I've had, positive media spotlighting my efforts in various ways. I've had women's groups to lean on. I've had men and women alike take me seriously and invite me to speak. I've had other women give me the vocabulary from my experience and validate like this like invisible box that women entrepreneurs are in, because you can't get funding. It's like 2% of women get the venture capital. I've also I've had access to things like therapy, I've raised my children, my child. I don't have children. I've raised my child in a progressive parenting style without compromise. And I've had plenty of encouragement and support for my ideas and ambitions, own 2 homes. I've, largely because of this program, and this opportunity here on WPRK, I personally know really incredible, progressive activists and politicians whose presence emboldens and inspires me. It's like really important to see representation and see examples of people out there, working towards positive solutions. And I've also, interestingly, never had to worry about what my in-laws think of my views or career because I've never been married. And I don't get called a spinster, old maid, or, have my, what we call the wanton woman or whatever for being the head of a household. When I wrote it down, it says a word. It's weird. So anyway, like I've had all of that, and that is not something the most people in my mother's generation had. Maybe a few of them, but the majority experience of my mother's generation did not have that, and mine did. We've been the number of female entrepreneurs, even without getting venture capital, is like crazy big, uh, in this day and age. That is important because there's been this, we were told like the future is female, you know what I'm saying? I would, even though, I say all those nice things, but I also have dealt with, as a female entrepreneur, I've dealt with, 2 decades of sexual harassment, misogyny, good old boys like conspiring to steal everything I built, some stalking, actual being spied on, peeping toms, financial abuse, creepy males, posing as investors with no intention of investing, all kinds of stuff. So it's not like I've had it rosy. Like there's been trials and tribulations. Okay. And so, and that to me was just like an expected social, well, some of it was expected, some of it was not. But I have been able to feel purposeful, accomplished, and I've been able to pursue my passions, outside of being a mother or a wife. Even though I know that my ambitions have also been stalled by, misogynist setups, misogynist systems, all of those different things. And so my daughter's experience is a little bit interesting. She was born in 2009, right? So born into a country with a Black president, and her first political rally was seeing Michelle Obama, stemming for Obama's second presidential run. I've taken her to the polls with me every single year, so she knows how critically important it is to vote. And she's watched Donald Trump win the electoral vote over Hillary Clinton, knowing that that he didn't win the popular vote, right? She did. She knows that he incited a riot after he lost to Joe Biden, a man. And then she was also witness to the briefly glorious, hopeful moment when Kamala Harris and Tim Walz got us all excited that we wouldn't have to watch a cartoon villain destroy our democracy after all. But of course, here we are right now. And this is like kind of bringing me back to my point that America has always been this way. It's always been run by good old boys. They've got a consistent track record of being ruthless, shadowy, greedy, controlling, manipulative, punitive, lying, cheating, and neglectful con men, right? When they're not being like outright violent, torturous, and murderous sociopathic cry bullies, right? Who just mess with people for fun often. And you know, this kind of idea that we were just going to have this like, I mean, we've had a lot of progressive wins in the last, you know, since how, and and actually let's like look back, not just recently, but historically, progress is always made, right? With a lot of not always in such like a bird chippery kind of way, right? Like it's always been a bit of a slug with all of this intimidation and harassment that is experienced by the people who dare to say, you know what, this is not cool, and here's what we should be doing instead, right? And so, like, I just want everyone listening to realize that this is America. And it's not just like, oh, another day in America, we should like not pay attention because America will survive and our democracy will survive and, you know, all those things. It only survives if we're paying attention. It only survives if we're participating. Active participation is what makes a difference. And it's kind of our turn to carry that torch, if you will, forward into you know, installing the collaborative, progressive, nurturing, win-win-win paradigm that a lot of us are just like, why isn't like this already? Like, this is like 2025, you know, like it's like you guys are so old-fashioned over there, you know, like it seems so obvious to those of us who just are like, yeah, this is like such a better like thing to do, right? I saw a little thing on like a meme, and she was like, yeah, I was reading the book Green Eggs and Ham to my, you know, 5-year-old, and they were like, after a few pages, they were like, he doesn't want the green eggs and ham. Like, can you just like back off? And it's just like, you know, like the younger generations get it. You know, you're violating my boundaries. I don't want the green eggs and ham. You know, and so yeah, like this is like our moment to not like, I don't know. There's like a lot of fear out there, and some people are in the direct crosshairs, and they should be concerned and taking um, measures to protect themselves and to get into a place of more solid ground. But it's about being resilient right now. It's about recognizing that that there are ways to help create the world that we want um, by installing the kind of things that we want in our own communities, having local leadership. And, you know, I was just looking at, there's been discussions of, like, I think there was been in the Northeast and also over in like the West Coast, there have been these regional healthcare coalitions that have been forming. And those are the kinds of solutions on like a state scale that we can see where we are breaking some of our codependencies on the federal government. When the federal government is showing us, like they just canceled uh, uh, disaster aid, right? They're doing everything they can to you know, yeah, they're like, yeah, we're not going to help you, you know. And so that's like a call for us to become more self-reliant, more self-determined, less codependent, and create resilient systems. So everything, honestly, that this program has talked about for a decade or more, when I've been on air, and what I've stood for is installing, you know, gardens in our yards and, you know, robust local food systems and getting to know your neighbors and mutual aid networks and all of these other like practical ways to not outsource our power out there, um, but to um, but to collectively own and be leaders, our self-appointed leaders in our communities, to just continue to create the kind of world that we want to be in. So yeah, we're not helpless. This is literally the American story of continuing to hold off, um, you know, these guys, man. You know, and just bring in a much nicer, more nurturing kind of world that we all can feel good about being in. So, anywho, that's it. That's my little soapbox for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I have a Substack for Front Porch Radio. If you want to listen to this episode because you turned in late, I will probably post it within the next few days. And I've got other good shows that are up there too. I finally got Skip's episode when he was talking about all of the erasure of the street art. That is finally up too. Some really good things going on there. So, anyway, you guys, thanks for tuning in. I'm Julie Weiler. I am getting my automation set up for the next top of the hour. And what's the name of your show again?
Golf of Mac.
He's being coy. Gulf of
No,
Rip. I love you. Okay. Stay tuned for Gulf of Mexico.